Hi, and welcome to Finest Women in Real Estate. This is a show where it's just real people having real talk about real life and specifically about real estate. And today I am joined by one of the finest women in real estate, Jacquie Willhoite. She is with eXp Realty. Welcome, Jacquie. Good to see you here today.
Nice to see you as well.
Next to Jacquie, we have Laleh. She is the CEO, broker, and loan officer for America Choice Mortgage and Benefits.
Correct.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Glad to see you on the show today.
Absolutely.
And we have Kimberly Whitfield. She's a founding partner of Smart Energy Marin.
Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you here. And at the end of the table, last but not least, Spencer Lugash. He is a real estate broker and attorney with Lugash Law Center. Spencer, it's good to see you here today.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
I see we are the bookends on this particular setup. That's great. You may ask yourself, you don't look like one of the finest women in real estate, Steve, but I'm happy to be here. We are the finest resources. We have one of the finest women in real estate, and the rest of us consider ourselves some of the finest resources. We provide services and consulting to help the realtors do their best for you. So on today's show, I want to talk about a couple of different issues. The first I want to get into is in doing the home inspections and getting ready for, especially an appraisal inspection, we get into some different issues that come up. Specifically, say, defective issues, structural problems. And I want to look at what kind of problems is that. Jacquie, you actually have a little bit of an engineering background, in case people at home didn't know that. Can you chime in on some of the issues that may come up?
So for inspections for appraisal, you'll have structural issues that can come up, mold issues. You want to inspect the property to its fullest, and you probably can give more of an example of what they're not able to lend on.
Well, one of the most important things for people to realize is there's a big difference between an appraisal and a home inspection.
That's correct.
Because I, as a lender, we need the appraisal because we're basing our loan off the collateral. And so that's one thing, and sometimes people get in situations, especially if you do maybe a for sale by owner and you don't understand the importance, and there is not a requirement by the lender to get a home inspection. People will, waive it just because it is a small expense, but it's minor in compared to buying a property that maybe has a, cracked slab or issues with the foundation or easement, just different things that could happen, especially when you have homes that are 20 and 30 years old. Having the appraiser is not going to look at the electrical or the plumbing or the water pressure or any of those nuances like a home inspector would.
So you would recommend they do a home inspection first before the appraiser ever sets foot on the property?
I recommend immediately, because if you run and go get an appraisal and a home inspection, you're potentially out, $800, sometimes $1,000, because they're easily, $400 or $500 each. So the sooner you find out that this is truly the property that you want on the outside as well as on the inside, then you can go full speed ahead with, your lending needs.
When I'm talking to agents and homeowners, one of the things to even go beyond that a little bit is I always try and tell them that they should get the sellers, the listing agents and the sellers should get their home inspection done even before they have a buyer. It's not something that's commonly done, at least in this market. Different markets do different things, but it gives the seller an idea of what might be wrong with their house that they didn't know about, so that they're not caught off guard halfway through the transaction, and when the buyer comes in to do a home inspection, and now all of a sudden there's all these issues that they have to take care of. So it's really a great idea to get it done early, have the seller take care of it. It's an expense that is minor in comparison to helping them better value their house, better list for the price, and find out what things might be wrong with it.
When I'm representing a buyer, I actually will make sure we do the inspection before they deposit their earnest money or anything, just so that they are comfortable moving along with the transaction.
So the appraisal part of it is important to, obviously, we think of that being more important to the buyer because they need to have, the house has to appraise for enough to cover the loan. But for the seller it is too, because if they have misjudged the value of their home, then that transaction could fall through and they need to know ahead of time. Now, that'll mean that if they do a home inspection ahead of time, they'll get a list of things that may be structural issues, they may be code issues, or they may just be things that are just out of date.
But having that inspection ahead of time before ordering the appraisal can make a big difference, because let's say somebody's going in for an FHA appraisal, and one of the requirements is there can't be any hazards, it has to be able to be occupied immediately, all running water, no issues. But you can buy a home as is with conventional financing, so if you have the inspection ahead of time, that can actually save a lot of time and money, because those are two different types of reports when you're dealing with FHA versus conventional. So.
Now, another question, if the seller goes ahead and does a pre-inspection, would the buyer still want to do their own home inspection?
Yes.
I would recommend so. I mean, but obviously, if the seller is getting an inspection done, just make sure it's really just kind of a Russian roulette. Pick a company, have them on Yelp with good reviews, and then at least the buyer has the option. Say, well, I really need to save $500, and I spoke to this company. They have great reviews, and then it's at least optional. But otherwise, I would never.
Reports too, which is always nice.
Right.
That's the benefit of having a good agent. They should be the ones that are advising their buyer clients on whether or not they should be getting inspection and how to go about that and who they might even want to be using. So.
Right.
So in looking at inspections and structural issues, I think about maybe work that's been done on the home that was never permitted.
It's an issue.
What kind of problems does that raise?
Well, I'll tell you from a legal perspective, there's a lot of confusion on that. People often think that if it's not permitted, then they can't sell the house, and that's not true. I mean, the house can be sold, but it's something for the buyer to know about as to whether or not that affects, in their mind, the value of the house. It can affect, from an appraisal standpoint, if somebody added a bedroom or turned the garage into a bedroom in an unpermitted fashion, and they're listing it as a 4-bedroom. For an appraisal perspective, it'll only be appraised as a 3-bedroom house, so it can affect that. But for the practical benefit that buyer might get, there is a 4th bedroom, and if that's worth it to them, for them to pay the extra money, then that's their decision. But it's really just something they want to know about, but it doesn't have to be fixed in order to transfer title.
Surprises aren't fun later when you think your home's worth $50,000 more than it actually is, because it wasn't fully understood.
Probably more important to get the inspection because it was never inspected by the agency with jurisdiction, so we want to inspect to make sure it was done correctly. So when we come back, we're going to take a little break here. When we come back, I want Kimberly to chime in on the whole process of going solar and how that's going to affect inspections and appraisals in our market. We'll be right back. Don't go away. Finest Women in Real Estate. We'll see you in just a minute.
It appears these hot ashes are about to be dumped, which could possibly start a wildfire. How will Smokey deal with such a hot situation? The garden hose defense. Next, a thorough stir. Then another spray. And finally, feeling if the ashes are cool.
Oh, yeah.
Ah yes, the selfie. A ritual practiced so frequently with this tribe, but not so much by Smokey Bear.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Welcome back to Finest Women in Real Estate. We're right in the middle of a discussion about home inspections and appraisals, and I'm joined today by Jacquie Willhoite. I am joined by Laleh Hanks, Kimberly Whitfield, and Spencer Lugash. And we have been talking about the concept of doing home inspections and the appraisals and how those tie together. But Kimberly, you had a personal experience recently involving all this to share with us.
Yeah, so we just purchased our home, and but before that, of course, there were a few inspections done on the house, and we got another inspection, and our real estate agent did some digging and discovered that the au pair suite on the back of our house was not permitted, and it also wasn't grandfathered in because it was an old suite that was done. So we definitely took that into consideration when we were deciding on how much we were going to actually spend on the home.
Okay. So it's real life out there.
Well, I would imagine too, it matters what kind of violations you either have, or is it just not permitted, because you could be buying a property that has an addition that actually needs to be torn down because they just will not permit it. So luckily that's probably not your situation, but I've seen that happen where you're about to buy something and that's going to be a big expense. And if somebody decides to start kind of getting strict on you, then sometimes the issues can be bigger.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, we were told that if we did do any work, which the entire kitchen in that section of the house needs to be redone, we would have to it would trigger everything. Yeah.
Yes.
And then it also triggers the city inspector coming out to look at whatever you're trying to do permitted properly, and they go, well, what's that in the back there? And we don't see a permit on file for that. They can tell you to tear it down.
Yeah.
So it's going to affect a lot of things. I had the same situation with a home that I had where a back room was added on. It was kind of a family room, had no footings underneath it. Had been an enclosed porch that eventually became a room. Could not add a second story to that house without tearing that entire thing out, going back and redoing the whole room.
It's an important distinction, though, as you said, the difference between something not being permitted and not being up to code.
Right.
Those are two different things.
Right. Although sometimes they go hand in hand, but you're right, they're two separate
Many
issues.
times,
Yes. Most people that do not permit things do not know the codes.
Yeah.
That's true. So I want to get in also to with Kimberly, because your background is in the solar and the green energy. California has a law coming out very shortly that everybody's going to have to go solar on all new construction and a lot of reconstruction. How does solar affect things like home appraisals? Is that considered an asset? Is it a liability? Is it a maintenance problem? Is it something that adds value? What does that look like?
Well, great question. The utility fees are liabilities. So what solar does is it actually increases the value of a home, turns a liability into an asset. I mean, it's a clean energy power plant on your roof. So obviously it adds value. There are a few different rules of thought in as far as how much value it adds. The sort of mid-range one is the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, and that's about $4.51. It is $4.51 per watt. So anywhere from $20,000 to $50,000 in added value over the course of the life of that home.
That's a big value. Now, have you seen this affect any of your
Sure. Well, I have a
funding?
client right now, and she's super excited to have solar. She actually closed escrow today, so
Good.
that was
Congratulations
great.
on that.
And so she has a solar finance bill, and it's $140 a month. And one of the things I'm really advocating for is that the underwriting guidelines kind of change how they look at solar. Because when I look at someone's loan, we don't factor your utility and your cell phone and your extras into the debt ratio. Your debt ratio is already, they're low enough to assume you have to take care of those things. But if you do have a financed liability like a lease that you're paying off solar, that will be factored in your debt ratio. So you might want to think ahead if you're, maybe going to refinance or do something to pay attention to that payment, because it's not quite fair or balanced, because they're saving probably double or triple maybe, even with the lease bill or the finance bill from utility payments. But they kind of get that double-edged hit right now because underwriting hasn't quite caught up with maybe what's fair or reasonable there. But it is a liability. They need to pay for it, because if they stop paying for some reason, then that's not their equipment yet. And so that's the reason behind the guideline.
Okay, and to be specific, we're talking about solar that's owned as opposed to solar that's on a long-term lease type of a deal.
Yeah,
Is
but
that
either
right?
way,
Yeah.
technically, I mean, as far as what I'm talking about with your debt ratio, solar does factor in if you're leasing or financing that equipment to your debt ratio, different than a utility bill, even though it's cutting those expenses down. So I hope someday that they'll allow maybe guidelines to get a quote from the utility company and say, hey, what would our bill be on this property? And if they can show that it's reduced, then why hit their debt ratio for it? So Fannie Mae, if you're listening, to take a tip.
And also, you're probably speaking of a loan that was transferred over from the previous homeowner, because you can transfer the solar loans.
Yeah, they
and
are
so,
assumable, which is convenient in most cases. So.
But there's so much value in that loan, even having a new loan, there's so much value in it, because as you were saying,
They're gonna
it's
save
so
money.
much less than what that utility bill, especially here in California,
And then
would be.
once that lease is gone, so if you're financing it, it will eventually go away, or you can pay it off. And sometimes when we look at clients refinancing, it just makes more sense to pay it off and simplify your deductions. So we do that as well, where we can actually finance solar, and there are great home improvement programs with aggressive financing, so people can go clean.
And Jackie, are homeowner or prospective homeowners, are they looking at solar as something they desire in a home, or is it just something that's just one of these amenities that kind of gets thrown in?
Each buyer is different, but yeah, I think for the majority of people would like solar. I think that's a plus for sure.
Okay.
With the electrical bills being the way that they are right now, I
Yeah.
can't imagine that somebody wouldn't see the value in it.
And you have so much, they have so much control. I mean, it's almost a monopoly pretty much, which doesn't always serve us well. So I think just getting out from underneath that kind of,
Yeah.
thumb, because if you use too much, they're gonna, charge you double. I get notices all the time at my office.
Also,
Turn it down.
second and third
too.
tier,
Yeah,
yeah.
And-
exactly.
And the rates are changing again. Next year, all California utilities are forcing homeowners to go into time of use. When do we use power? In the afternoon and evening. That's the most expensive time. So if you're a homeowner that has like even a lower bill, which isn't likely around here, but having a lower electricity bill and then you're forced into time of use, it's like you're paying tier 3 on most of the energy that
Or
you
safety.
use.
Think about our power outage we had when somebody flipped the wrong switch, I think, in Arizona. We were out of power for how many hours? I think it was like 12. We met our neighbors. That was the positive. It was really, really great. But in that way, yeah, everybody kind of, had a good time. We made the best of it. But, those homes with solar, I would imagine they're going to be impacted much differently.
Yes, they would. I would, as long as it's a sunny day.
Yeah.
Is that great?
Well,
And as long as they have a battery backup, that's a
That's
whole
right.
other conversation.
okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to take another break. And when we come back, we're going to be joined again by Jacquie, Laleh, Kimberly, and Spencer. And we're going to wrap it up with some of their best tips. Don't go away. Don't change that dial. We'll be right back.
It appears these hot ashes are about to be dumped, which could possibly start a wildfire. How will Smokey deal with such a hot situation? The garden hose defense. Next, a thorough stir. Then another spray. And finally, feeling if the ashes are cool. Oh, yeah. Ah, yes, the selfie. A ritual practiced so frequently with this tribe, but not so much by Smokey Bear.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Welcome back to Finest Women in Real Estate. I am again joined by Jacquie Willhoite. She is with eXp Realty. I am with Laleh Hanks. She is the CEO, broker, and loan officer of America Choice Mortgage. We have Kimberly Whitfield from Smart Energy Marin. She's one of the founding partners. And we have Spencer Lugash. He is a real estate broker and attorney with Lugash Law Center. We've been discussing home inspections, we discussed appraisals, we discussed the effect of solar on things. And to wrap things up, we got a short little period of time here. So in about 45 seconds or so, can you give your best tip for a buyer or a seller based on what we talked about today?
So I'll give a tip for a buyer. Make sure that you do your inspection early. No matter what, if the seller has an inspection he's handing you, you need to do your due diligence as well and do an inspection.
Okay. Laleh.
So we didn't really touch on this, but if you do have a home inspection, remember it's not needed for your loan. So unless you have a special relationship with your loan officer and you have like a boutique lender, I really wouldn't pass it on to the lender because you don't want to open up a can of worms. That appraisal is what you want to deal with, and you want to really handle those two things very much separately. And if there are repairs that are needed because of the home inspection, you might also want to consult with your mortgage consultant on how to verb that. Because if you talk about all the different repairs and you trigger something that is a hazard and you don't want the underwriter to make the appraiser go back out and make sure everything's finished, you want to make sure you're working with some really knowledgeable professionals that are communicating about those things before they go in writing on a contract.
So the information from the inspection and from the appraiser, less is more at this point. Is that
I think
right?
so, as long as you're really, consulting with the right professionals about it, and you don't need the big babysitter of the lender to tell you what and how to do it. And when I think they tell us enough on how long it takes to decide when we want to sign or fund, loan docs. But they will get in your business if there's something like, let's say, termites, and you guys don't waive it. Certain things can come up that can be dealt with later, so it could delay a closing unintentionally.
Okay. Kimberly, what's your best tip?
So I would say for the seller to educate the new homeowner, someone coming in to buy your home, about your system if you have solar, and for a buyer, get a utility bill from the previous homeowner, know what you're walking into, and then you can actually plan for what solar looks like for your home going forward and how much you could actually save.
And you can call the utility company. You don't need to get it from actually the homeowner. You can call the utility company and they will give you, just a blind history of usage on a property. So sometimes
so
they might not want to share.
Little life cycle cost analysis
Yes.
before you get into the deal. Sounds a good deal. Spencer, one thing that Laleh said, you're an attorney, and you know that in deposition, the less you say, the better. I think that's what she was saying. Give us your best tip for a buyer or a seller.
Okay. Actually, I'll go off of what she was talking about. So since we were talking about inspections, a lot of times what comes after an inspection is a request for repair, where the buyer's asking the seller to fix something. And oftentimes, in lieu of actually repairing the property, they'll just say, can you give me a monetary credit on the purchase? And so one thing that I think is important for both parties to realize when that happens, so you can probably attest to, is you need to check with the buyer's lender to make sure that that credit is available, because often every loan has a different cap, or every product, as to how much is available as a seller credit back, and maybe they've already asked for it in the original offer and they're already getting some money, whatever the case may be. And if the parties agree, great, we're going to give you $15,000 credit, and they all think it's all a go and they're very happy, but then right before close of escrow, the lender finds out and the lender says, no, that's not allowed. It can be a big problem.
It comes down to your closing fees.
We're out of time. I want to thank every one of you for being here on the show today. For Jacquie, Laleh, Kimberly, and Spencer, we want to thank you for joining us on Finest Women in Real Estate today. Check us out on fwretvshow.com, and make sure you tune in again next week. We'll see you there.